Is this working? Hello? Is this working? Hello? Hello? Testing? Testing? Nope. Does it work? Is it working? Is this working? And it's still not working. Oh, okay. It's just really quiet. Okay, now it's working. Hello? It's just not very loud. Sabrina. Serena.
Let's see if this one works. There we go. Testing. There we go. Cool. Good morning. So the team just started. We're going to do some Swedish overlays today. A Swedish overlay is where you take a colored bubble and you put it on top of a clear bubble so that the color is on the outside. So they just got started. They're getting one of the bubbles ready, and they're going to get the colored one started pretty soon. They're going to make a couple of these this morning. But it's a pretty cool process. They take the colored bubble and they attach it to this one, and then they flip it inside out so that the color is raw on the outside of the glass. And the color is glass. It just has different metals in it that make the color. So they're going to get that one started pretty soon. And I think we're going to make 3 or 4 of these today there's a private commission that these pieces are being made for. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. My name is Shannon. You can just yell at me. Let me explain on the microphone so everyone can hear what I'm saying. So today we're working on a private commission. They're doing what are called Swedish overlays. The Swedish overlay is where you take one bubble of glass and another bubble, and you smush them together, and then you flip one of the bubbles inside out so that they're both on one pipe. So that's what we're working on today. They just started, so we haven't done much of that yet. This is the bubble of clear glass. Or no, this is the white glass that they just encased in clear. And then the bubble of clear glass is in that box right there. The silver box is called the garage. If the glass gets too cold, it will break, so the garage just holds it at a temperature where it stays hot enough while they work on the other part. So there's multiple moving parts. One of them is keeping warm in that box, and the other one is at this middle bench. They're going to blow that bubble. The bubble's inside the glass, and you can't really see it because it's covered in opaque white glass. So there's a bubble in there, but you can't see the outline of it, but you'll see the glass expand when they blow into the pipe. And they're doing a private commission. They just started it today, so this is really just the first step of making the piece. You won't see a finished piece today, but you'll see the first part of it. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to yell it out to me. My name is Shannon, so get my attention if you have a question. The tool, Gabe is the one at the bench right now. He's using a tool called a block. It's a wooden spoon that's soaked in water. When you soak it in the water, you touch it to the glass. The glass is hot enough that it immediately evaporates the water and turns into steam. So there's a thin bed of steam in between the tool and the glass, and that's what kind of preserves the block. But the block helps get all the glass in a symmetrical shape so that the bubble blows out evenly. So they use the block to get it all symmetrical, and now he's carving in a restriction line so they can get the bubble off the pipe later. It's like a score mark so they can break it off the pipe. So everything that you make on a pipe has to have this score line. It's called a jack line because the tool is called the jacks. So he's carving in the jack line with the jacks, those big barbecue tong looking tool. That's the most versatile glass blowing tool. So he could use that tool in a lot of different ways. But they got the restriction line in there now. This is going to be one of two bubbles that we'll use for a Swedish overlay. The color is on the inside, and it's encased in clear glass. So they're going to take this bubble and stick it onto the bubble that is being held in the garage. They'll stick them together, and then they'll flip this bubble inside out so that the color's on the outside. And that's called a Swedish overlay. They're overlaying the clear bubble with color, but they want the color to be the outside layer, so that's why they do it this way. Glass blowing is essentially a layering process, so they're building up the layers on two separate rods, and then they'll put them together when they're both ready. The temperature and timing is really important, so they've got to line up the temperature and timing for the two separate bits of glass so that they can put them together. And they're going to do this a couple of times this morning, so you'll see this a few times. It's a bit of a slower process, so it's not going to be fast-paced, but that's the temperature and timing for this specific technique. So we're going to be using the white glass, and then they're going to use a transparent blue and put it on top of the white so that the blue looks really vibrant and bright on top of that white layer underneath it. The color is glass. It just has different metals that make it different colors. So chemists make the color for us. We buy it in bars of solid bars of glass. And then you preheat them in the garage, just like that other piece is sitting in there. The garage is about 1,000 degrees, so it preheats the cold bits of glass. That way we can pick them up and put them into the fire. The glass in the furnace, there's two furnaces. They're the ones with the doors that are shut. Those keep all of the clear glass molten, and they sit in there at 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit around. You scoop it out of the furnace the same way you'd get honey with the honey dipper on the end of the pipe, and then you blow a bubble into it, build it up in layers. So they're building up the layers, lining up the temperature of the two separate rods so that they can attach the glass together onto one rod. We have an example over here somewhere. Usually. Let me go grab one over there. Okay. Is this on? There we go. Oh yeah, they're putting them together right now. So they're doing the Swedish overlay. They're going to break it off the pipe that's on the outside of the bench by using water. The water will shock and crack the glass. Then you just hit the pipe and it breaks where you put the water. That's why the timing and the temperature are important. If it's too hot, it won't break. If it's too cold, then you'll break more than the part that you want to. So they broke it strategically in that spot, and now the white bubble is attached to the clear one. They're going to heat it up and use a tool to flip the white one inside out and wrap it around the clear. But this is how the color starts. This is a green bar, a bar of green glass. This would go into that box, and it would preheat it to 1,000 degrees. Then you can get a solid rod and stick it onto this and melt it in those reheating chambers, which are the big barrels. Those are just big barrels of fire. They're around the same temperature as the furnace, but they're empty so that you can put the glass on the end of the stick inside and reheat it. So different metals make these different colors, and they all start like these bars. So they've got a couple of these bars in that box. They're using a white and a transparent blue for this piece, but when the glass is hot, all the colors look orange just because they're hot. When glass is hot, it glows because it's emitting light through the thermal energy. So it looks orange, but that's just because of the temperature. As it cools, that color will come out more, but if it gets too cold, it will break. So you won't really see the true colors of the glass while we're working at these temperatures. And when the piece is finished, they put it into what's called the annealing oven, where it cools down slowly overnight. So when we take these out of the annealer is whenever we'll see the real colors. But they're using a tool made of wet wooden sticks to push that white bubble onto the clear one and flip it inside out so that it wraps around the whole bubble. It's called a Swedish overlay. So they're going to do a couple Swedish overlays this morning. This is just the first one. But a Swedish overlay takes a little bit of time. So they're probably going to do like 4 or 5 this morning. That might be too ambitious, maybe 4. I don't know. But they're flipping it inside out right now. You can see on the screen a little bit better. He's pushing on that outside layer, and it's slowly wrapping around the clear glass underneath it. And they did a double overlay. So the blue is the inside of that bubble that they're flipping inside out right now. And the white is the part that's going to be directly touching the clear glass. So once it's all the way flipped around, you'll see that blue layer on the outside. It'll look blue-ish. It won't look as bright, vibrant blue as it's supposed to. But if the glass gets too cold, it breaks. So they're going to go back and forth between sitting at the bench and going back to the reheating chamber to heat the glass up again. The consistency of glass is kind of like honey, where when it's really hot, it's really molten and moving, and as it gets colder, it gets stiffer. So as it gets stiffer, they've got to reheat it so it's more malleable. But you can see they're really pushing that colored glass onto that bubble. It kind of looks like a little sombrero right now. They've got to push the rest of it down. And then they can blow the bubble in that a little bit bigger, carve in that restriction line that will help them get it off the pipe. And then that'll be the first step of a couple of different steps that they're not going to do all today. So they're doing the first part of a multiple day process right now. It's for a private commission, so they're going to be doing a lot of the starting prep work for this private commission today. This is a specific type of Swedish overlay tool. It helps them grab and pull to get the rest of that glass onto the stick, flat, laying flat over the clear bubble. But now you can see the blue on the outside. And there is a bubble in there, you just can't see it because the color is opaque, so it's covering up the bubble. There's a opaque white with a transparent blue on top. So the white underneath the transparent blue is going to make it a lot more vibrant and bright. But you'll see the glass look like it's getting bigger when they blow the bubble. That torch is just helping us get the metal tools hot. The metal takes a lot of heat from the glass pretty fast, so if they're hot when we start, then the heat lasts longer. What's that?
The torch.
Oh, it's oxygen and propane. This one. This microphone is being weird. Okay, the microphone's on. So those tables over there, Gabe is the one in the hat. He's the lead glassblower for this. He took the glass and he rolled it on that table. It's a steel top table called a marver, and it's used for shaping and cooling the glass. So when he rolls it on the marver, it's cooling the outer skin and also helping him shape this up into a more specific shape that he wants before he starts to blow the bubble. So whatever part of the glass touches that metal is going to get colder, and then when he blows into the pipe, the hotter part of the glass will expand more. So he's cooling the tip of that bubble. He's going to blow into the glass, and the hotter part that's not touching the table will expand, but the part that's colder will stay kind of like a point on the tip. So he's controlling the temperature so that the part of the glass he wants to expand will move without blowing the bubble through the bottom and making it too thin. Do you guys have any questions? It's okay if you don't. I just want to make sure.
I have a really dumb question.
Okay.
Where's the camera?
There's one there. And there's one there. And there's one over there somewhere. There's multiple different ones because when they're making really big stuff, they can kind of cluster around the bench and you can't really see what they're doing. So the camera gives you a different angle so you can actually see what's happening.
Okay.
But I think that's the one that's on. It's just zoomed in. They also have the cameras because they do live streams. So whatever's up there is what the live stream is seeing. So if you ever want to watch what's going on, but you don't want to sit in here when it's not going on. So he's carving in the jack line, which is the restriction line that will help us get this glass off the pipe. Everything that's on the outside, like to the right of that line he carved in, is the piece, and everything to the left of it is what's holding it onto the pipe. So everything on the left of it won't be part of the final thing when it comes off the pipe. So really it's just the bubble with the blue on it, and then the stuff on the pipe is just the extra that we don't need. That's what's holding the piece onto the pipe so that we can make it. But it won't make it as part of the final piece. We just need a way to get the piece off the pipe. So that line will help us break it in a controlled way so it doesn't send a crack down the side of the piece. Such a good boy. So that torch is called a fluffy torch because it's a really fluffy flame. He's using it to heat up a specific part of the glass. So if he preheats that part and then they heat the whole thing in the fire, that hotter part will be hotter when they bring it out, and then they can control which part of the glass expands. They can also stretch the glass if they want this bubble to be a little bit longer instead of rounder. They'll heat that part up, and then they'll just use gravity. They'll hang the pipe down and it will stretch. The glass is stretchy when it's hot. So they're building up that temperature. They're about to do what's called a punty transfer. So they're going to attach a separate rod to this piece. Once that rod is attached, they're going to remove it from the blowpipe and transfer it to the other rod. They've been blowing that bubble, so the top of it has an opening. When they break it, it'll have an opening where they can open the top, so it's more of like a cup shape instead of a bubble. They're making what's called a stuff cup with a Swedish overlay. And the Swedish overlay is the color pattern. The stuff cup is a cup that they're going to make that they will stuff more glass into later. They'll put the cup on a little ring on the ground. They'll get a bubble of clear glass, and they'll stuff it into the cup, which will give them the color on the outside of all the clear glass. They can blow it out into whatever shape. They used thermal shock to get the piece off the pipe. So when the glass is around 1,000 degrees, if you put water on it, it creates cracks. So they put water right on that part so they could crack it and then break it off the pipe. So now they've flipped it around. We can open the bubble. He can put tools inside that opening. It's still pretty cold right now, so he's not really changing the shape. He's just making sure it's symmetrical. And then they'll start to heat up the top half and open that out so it's more like a cup shape where the opening is big. Right now the opening is like tiny, so they need to stretch that glass open. So really all you're seeing today is them working with the hot glass. You can also do different things to the glass when it's cold. So you can take it into what's called the cold shop. This is our hot shop because the glass is hot in here. The cold shop you can grind into and cut and polish the glass. So they're going to, once this cools down, they're going to take it to the cold shop and carve designs in it, and then they can stuff more glass into it and blow it out, and it'll have a design on it. So it's a back and forth process between working with the glass when it's hot, letting it cool down, and working with it when it's cold, and then heating it back up and working with it more. So we're making prep work today for taking this into the cold shop to create a design on it. They're working on getting ready to take this piece off the pipe and put it into the annealing oven. The annealing oven is where the glass is going to cool down slowly overnight. If the glass gets too cold too quickly, it'll break. So the annealing process just helps us cool the glass without it cracking or breaking. So our annealing oven is the big black box there under that walkway. It sits at about 950 degrees or so. That's like a holding temperature for the glass. So it's going to stay in that shape and slowly cool down. But Stina is the one putting it in the annealer right now. She's got a bunch of protective gear on because she's putting the top half of her body into a 950-degree oven. So protective gear helps her load that in there. She had some Kevlar gloves on, which is a heat-resistant material. She could grab the piece of glass that was about 1,000 degrees and put it in there. It's kind of like a hot potato instead of it burning her hands. We're going to make 3 more or 2 more? 2 more for 3 total. Cool. So they're going to do 2 more of those cups. And then later, once they're cooled down, they'll carve in some designs on them. And then instead of getting more glass out of the furnace, they'll take those cups and put them in the annealer. Instead of cooling it down, they'll do it in reverse. They'll start at room temperature and turn it up so that it's hot enough that they can take it out and work with it again. If you take cold glass and put it into these high temperatures, thermal shock will make it, it'll explode. I'm not being dramatic. It will literally go explode into a bunch of pieces. So they have to have it at least 1,000 degrees to put it into that fire so that it doesn't explode or crack. So it's a lot of temperature control, making sure it's in between a specific window of temperature before you try to put it in the fire. Anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees is a safe temperature to work with the glass to where it won't break. But they just finished one of the cups. They're going to get started making another one. So this is going to be our clear bubble that we'll put the color on top of, doing another Swedish overlay. The furnace over there is where we get the glass out. Trent is the one that just gathered some glass out of the furnace. The same way you get honey out of a jar. So if you have a honey dipper and a jar of honey, you put it in there and you turn it, it wraps around and you get glass on the end. And even when the glass is clear, it looks orange fresh out of the furnace because it's about 2,200 degrees in the furnace, Fahrenheit. It's 1,200 degrees Celsius. The annealing process depends on how thick the glass is. The thicker it is, the longer it needs to anneal, because all the glass has to cool at the same rate or it breaks from the tension of the different temperatures. So if it's really thick, like if you make a paperweight, it needs to be in there more like a couple days. But these aren't super thick, so probably overnight is fine. But there's like a curve on a graph with the time and the thickness. It takes longer if it's thicker. Yeah. But this is our clear glass bubble. We're making a colored glass bubble on that side of the studio. They'll eventually bring the two together and make another Swedish overlay, where they'll take the colored glass, attach it to this, and then lay it all on top of it. Were you guys here for the first Swedish overlay bubble? Did you see them doing all that? Oh, yeah. It's a pipe. It's a hollow steel straw. So they blow through one end, and it inflates the glass. So Gabe at the bench is telling Stina when to blow into the pipe and when to stop blowing. And he's using his best judgment and his experience to know when to tell her to stop. We don't want to blow the bubble too thin. If the glass gets too thin, it loses all of its structure, and it just like... It's a weird way to describe, but when glass is hot, if it gets thin, it can wrinkle if it gets too hot, and then it'll like fold over itself and mess up the pattern. You're also at more of a risk of the glass breaking if it gets really thin, because the thinner it is, the faster it will cool down, and if it gets too cold, it will crack from thermal shock. So there's a lot of things that this team is balancing right now. There's a lot of multitasking and a lot of different nuances in glass blowing. But the colder the glass gets, the stiffer it is. So this piece, this bubble, even though it still looks really hot, it's about 1,000 degrees right now. 1,000 degrees is cold for glass. But if it gets much colder than that is when it starts to break. So 1,000 degrees is like a comfortable temperature to have the glass hold, because if it's at 1,000 degrees, it's not going to break, but it's also not going to change shape or like melt or slump. So they're really just waiting for this to cool a little bit, because I believe they're going to get more glass on top of it. So glass blowing is a layering process. It's so hot in the furnace, you can't scoop it all out at once. So they build it up one scoop at a time, making it thicker and thicker so they can blow it and stretch it out more. But they always have to keep the pipes turning because gravity wants to pull the glass to the ground. So if you stop turning it, the glass will just fall off the stick. So they keep the pipe turning to counteract gravity. That's why we're constantly turning it on these rails. Even when it's at 1,000 degrees, it could still move a little bit, kind of slump and get off center. So we're always turning the pipe no matter what else you're doing. It's like extreme multitasking. You're doing great. Doing great. You might not be able to see them over here very well because the garage is kind of blocking your view, but they're getting the color bubble set up to attach to this other bubble. For anyone that wasn't here when I was explaining this earlier, the colored glass starts like this as a bar. So they're not using this color today, but this is just an example of what the color looks like. This is glass. It just has different metals in it that make the different colors. We don't make the color ourselves. There are glass chemists that make these and sell them to us. So we go to the glass color and supply store and buy whatever colors we want to use, and then we bring them into the hot shop and heat them up until they're hot enough that we can put them on our bubble or whatever we're making. So they're melting the colors on the ends of these sticks so that they can add them to the clear bubble. All the colors look orange when they're hot just because of the temperature. Earlier, we made a cup that had white glass with blue on top of it. The blue was transparent, so the white underneath made it look really vibrant. I think we're doing the same thing. It's hard to know what the colors are when they're hot. I'm guessing we're going to do the same colors. It looks like it. It all looks orange when it's hot, so I'm guessing. But that is Marver. It's a steel top table. You can shape and cool the glass with that. So Gabe is shaping this little bit of glass. We've got some of our other team on this side of the studio at the bench on that side, getting some more color and other pieces set up. Because glass blowing, you can have a lot of moving parts all at once, and that's why you have a team, because you need more hands to do all the different parts. For this stuff that we're making today, they've got 4 people on the floor, which is a good amount for what we're doing. But if we were making something bigger, you'd add more people. So it really depends on what you're making, how many people are on the team, and what tools you're using. There's a lot of variables in glass blowing. So the color bars, you have to preheat and get them hot enough that they're molten and the same temperature as the clear glass. So this is how we get them, and then you have to heat them up and melt them. So if I took this and tried to heat it up right now, it would explode because it's too cold. So all the bars that we're using today are in the garage, which is 1,000 degrees. So they're all preheating to 1,000 degrees. That way they can take them out and then put them in the fire and melt them down the rest of the way so that they're molten. So it's a little bit of a process to melt them. All the glass in the furnace is clear, so that keeps the clear glass molten, but the clear glass is like the blank canvas. So they take whatever colors they want to use and preheat them and then add them to the clear. You can have furnaces full of colored glass, but then that's the only color you can use. So the clear glass is like the blank canvas. You can add whatever color. Yeah. Are these all going to be the same color? Is it all white?
I forgot to flip it in here.
So they just did what's called an overlay. They overlaid the white on top of the blue, and they're going to smush it down to where it's all around the blue. They'll encase that in clear and blow up the bubble. And then we have the clear glass bubble in the garage. When this one is the right shape and size, they'll take the clear one out of the garage and they'll put them together. The Swedish overlay is where you have the color on the inside of the bubble with clear on the outside. You attach that to the clear bubble on the other rod, and then you flip the colored bubble inside out so that the raw color is on the outside of the bubble. The reason you do the Swedish overlays this way is because if the raw color is on the outside, you can carve into it or sandblast it, and then it makes a design on the piece. That way they can later heat the cup that they're making back up and stuff it with more glass and blow it out into whatever sculpture or shape they're going to make. So we're doing the first part of a multiple day process in the hot shop. It's going to go back and forth between hot glass, blowing it and shaping it. Once it's cold, you can take it and sandblast it or carve into it. And then you reheat it. Similar to how you preheat the color bars, you have to preheat any of the glass you want to take and put back in the fire. They'll preheat it again once it has the design on it, and then make something out of that. So this is the first step, is making the piece so that you can carve into it. They're making a couple of these this morning. So this is the second one. They're going to make 4 total, or 3 total. So they made 1 already. They're making the second one, and then they'll make a third one when this one is done. The first one they made is sitting in that black box over there. That's called the annealing oven. It's going to cool the glass down slowly so that it doesn't break. Glass just generally doesn't like to change temperature too quickly. It'll crack from the thermal shock or break. So they have to cool it down slowly, just like they have to heat it up slowly. So it all has to be the right temperature to do what you want to do. And for those of you that joined us later and missed me explaining this, the furnace holds all the clear glass, and it sits in there at about 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. That keeps it molten, but it also makes the clear glass look orange. So anytime it looks orange, that just means it's really hot. But this will be white with transparent blue on top when it cools down. And then the clear glass will just be clear. It only looks orange because of how hot it is. It's glowing because of that thermal energy. It emits light and makes it look like it's glowing orange. Yeah, glass blowing is like a layering process. You can put a layer of color and then encase that in clear, and then put another layer and encase that in clear. So if you cut a piece of glass down the middle, the inside of it would look like little, you could see the layers inside there. Right now, Gabe is using a block, or he was. It was that wet wooden spoon. It soaks in that bucket of water right behind the bench, and he can use the wet wood to shape the glass and get it nice and symmetrical. That way, when he blows the bubble, the glass blows out evenly instead of out the thicker or thinner side. The thicker the glass is, the longer it stays hot. So if there's a thick and thin spot, the thinner part will get colder faster and stop expanding, and then the thick part will just expand and get it all off center. So the block helps him keep it symmetrical. Gabe is carving in the jack line right now. The jack line is like a score mark, so we can get this off the pipe later. We're going to break it in a strategic way on that line that he just carved in. Every piece you make, no matter what shape, size, or color it is, you have to have a way to get it off the blowpipe. So that's what the jack line is for. Every piece we make has to have that in there so you can get it off the pipe. So the jacks is the tool he's using. That's why it's called the jack line, because you carve it in with the jacks. That's our most versatile glass blowing tool. So you'll see him use those a lot of different ways. You can squeeze glass in between the blades. You can use the blades to change the shape of the glass. And it's a tool made of metal. Yeah, you have a question? Sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah, you can take pictures and videos, whatever you want. So they got the clear bubble out of the garage, and they're going to get it to the right temperature so that they can put the clear bubble and the colored bubble together. The furnaces that keep the glass molten are 2,200 degrees. And then these other ones are called reheating chambers. They're about the same temperature. But the reheating chamber is just a big barrel of fire that you can put the glass in and reheat it. Because when it's on the stick, when you take it out of the fire, it starts to get colder and stiffer. So the reheating chamber is just so we can build the temperature back up. Yeah. So it's a lot of back and forth between sitting at the bench and then heating the glass up at the reheating chamber. As long as the glass stays in a specific window of temperature, it'll be good. But if it gets too cold, it breaks. So they have to make sure they heat it up enough that it stays at least 1,000 degrees. And they're getting ready to do our Swedish overlay right now. We've got our clear bubble, and then they're heating up the colored bubble. They're going to smash the colored bubble onto the clear one, break it off the pipe, and then flip it inside out so that it's laying over the clear bubble. The Swedish overlay makes the color on the outside of the bubble. That way they can carve into it or sandblast it. Other techniques in glass blowing, you can make the color and then encase it in clear, but then you can't carve the color away. So they're doing this way specifically so that they can carve the designs into the color, which will remove layers of the color where you can see the colors that are underneath it. So they've got white underneath blue. Right now, the bubble's inside out. The white is on the outside. They're going to flip it inside out so that the color inside the bubble is on the outside. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of an abstract process, but they're smushing the colored bubble onto the clear one. When glass is hot, it's really molten and malleable, so it's moving enough that they can smush it on there. And now they're going to use water to shock that line. Oh yeah, here's a good visual of it. They're going to flip the bubble inside out. They got to break it off the pipe. So they're using thermal shock. They're getting that part of the glass really cold so that it breaks when they hit the pipe. It'll break off right there on that restriction line. Just like that. And now they've got that clear bubble with the colored bubble on the outside. They just need to get it hot enough that they can flip it around. So they're going to get that really hot. It might take a minute to get it hot enough, but then they'll sit at the bench and use some of our tools to kind of peel that glass around. Yeah.
What's he doing with the leftover?
I think he's just going to make something out of it because there's enough to make a little cup
There's
or
enough
something.
glass there to make something.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
The color could be really expensive, so we don't really want to do it. So they're going to use it for something. So he's getting this hot enough that he can flip that bubble inside out. That way the color on the inside of the bubble gets put on the outside. He's using a tool that's similar to the jacks. It's just made of wet wooden sticks instead of metal blades. And you can use that to push the colored glass and slowly get it to fold over that clear bubble that it's on top of. That's called a Swedish overlay. It's an overlay of color with a technique that was created by Swedish glass artists. And if you can't really see what they're doing very well at the bench, there's always the screen up there has another angle where you can see it better. So he is flipping that glass color bubble inside out. That little skirt that he's making on there isn't going to be part of the final piece. So that's just extra. Anything that's actually on the pipe is not part of the piece. The glass on the pipe is called the moil, M-O-I-L. That's like the glass that holds the piece onto the pipe, but it's not going to be part of the piece. He'll carve in another restriction line on there, and everything that's on the outside, farthest away from the pipe, is going to be the piece, and everything that's on the left, closer to the pipe, will just be waste. There's a little bit of waste with everything you make because the glass is what on the pipe is what holds what you're making onto the pipe. But you can't take that part off. So there's a little bit on there called the moil that is just the anchor. Gabe is using the Marver, M-A-R-V-E-R. It's a steel top table you can roll the glass on top of. It shapes and cools the glass. Because of the temperature, you can't really use your hands to do that part. So we have that table you roll the glass on to help shape it. That torch is called a fluffy torch. The glass that's closer to the pipe is colder than the glass that's farther away because the metal of the pipe kind of takes some of that heat away. So that torch helps get the glass on the metal or on the pipe hot enough that they can work with it. They need to carve in the restriction line that's going to help them get the piece off the pipe. So they got to make sure that part is hot enough to do that. So that torch just helps them preheat that part a little bit. That way when they put it into the reheating chamber, the hotter part is going to heat up faster. So when it comes back to the bench, they might do that again. They have to build up that heat little by little. But once it's hot enough, they'll carve in that restriction line. That way they have a way to get it off the pipe. So that tool that Gabe is using right now is newspaper folded up and soaked in water. So a wet pad of newspaper can shape the glass. It's similar to the blocks, the wet wooden spoons. As soon as that touches the glass, it's so hot that it evaporates the water immediately and makes steam. So there's a thin layer of steam in between the tool and the glass. And that's how you can use the newspaper and it's not hot in your hands. There's a lot of science behind glass blowing, lots of physics, lots of chemistry. That's just one example. You can use a folded up pad of wet newspaper to shape glass. As long as it's wet. I mean, if that starts to get dry, it starts to smoke instead of steam. And then it gets hot in your hand. All right, so now Gabe is carving in the jack line, which is going to be the way we take the piece off the pipe. That restriction line is like a score mark, so we can get it off there later. All the glass on the left side of the pipe is the moil, which is just the glass that is holding the piece onto the pipe. So everything on the right side of the moil is going to be the piece. Everything on the left side is going to be waste. But that is necessary to have the piece on the pipe. And this looks kind of green, but that's just because it's hot. All the colors look a little weird when they're hot. This is going to be white with transparent blue on top of it when it cools down. But all the colors look a little off at the temperatures we're working with. So the color is just something you have to trust the process. None of them look like what they're supposed to when the piece is between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees. So we're getting ready to do what's called a punty transfer. The punty is the rod that we have on this side of the bench. We're transferring the piece off the blowpipe and onto a different rod, essentially flipping it around 180 degrees so that we can work on the other side. You can't do much to it on the other side right now because that's what's holding it onto the pipe. So we have to take it off the pipe to work on that part. So hot glass sticks to other hot glass. This is just a little bit of clear glass on the end of a solid rod. They've attached it to the piece, and now they're going to use thermal shock to their advantage to break the piece off the blowpipe. Water cracks the glass. You just tap the pipe. Those vibrations go into the cracks and break it off the pipe. It has to be done at the right temperature and timing for it to work. So if the piece was too hot, it wouldn't want to come off the pipe. If it's too cold, it would crack and break the whole thing. So that just comes with practice. Glass blowing is something you learn through trial and error. So learning how to not break glass involves breaking a lot of glass. Well, these guys are pretty experienced. They've been blowing glass a long time, so they figured it out by now. They flipped this around. Now they can open it up. They're making what's called a stuff cup. So they did a Swedish overlay, which puts the color, the raw colored glass, on the outside of the cup. It doesn't have a flat spot on the bottom like a normal cup would have, but that's because this is going to get more glass stuffed into it later. So this stuff cup will sit on a little ring inside of one of the kilns. You can get more glass on a separate rod, blow a bubble into it, and then you'll stuff all of that into that cup so that color stays on the outside. Because glass blowing is like a layering process. Because it's so hot in the furnace, you can only get so much at a time, so you scoop it out in layers and build it up. But we want the color to be on the outside of all the layers. So that's why we're doing the techniques that we're doing, so that the color is on the outside instead of encased in clear glass. So today we're making a couple of these stuff cups, and they're going to cool the stuff cups in the annealing oven so that they cool down without breaking. Once they're cold, they can carve into the color that's on the outside, which will show the layers underneath and create a pattern. Then they can reheat the stuff cup that has the pattern carved into it and stuff more glass into it and blow it out into a shape, and that will have a design on it. So it's a multiple day process. You're just seeing the first part. They've got to make the glass to carve the pattern into it so that they can make the piece with the pattern on it. So it's a lot of back and forth between working with the glass when it's hot, letting it cool down, and then carving into it when it's cold, and then heating it back up and working on the glass when it's hot again. Back and forth. So they're done with this stuff cup. They got to put it into the annealing oven where it can cool down. They're going to break it off there the same way they got it off the blowpipe. And Stina has on some Kevlar gloves and some protective gear because the annealer sits at about 950 degrees Fahrenheit. So she has the top half of her body in the 950 degree oven. She got to wear protective gear to do that. So she put that in there. That one's finished. Let's give the team a big hand for their nice little Swedish overlay stuff cup. And we're going to do, I think, 2 more of those.
Yeah, thanks. Bye, buddy. He's so cute. Good boy.
So if you missed the beginning of the last one, they're going to do another one so you can see how it all goes.
Yeah, thanks.
So thanks for joining us. So the team is starting up another Swedish overlay. With the color, this is an example of what we start with our color. So the furnaces hold all the clear glass at a molten temperature, but we don't have a furnace for every color. So we start with it like this. It's just a bar of solid colored glass. This is a green one. You take the bar and you put it into this big metal box. This is called the garage because that's where you park your pieces of glass until you're going to use them. The glass has to stay in a specific temperature. If it gets too cold, it'll break. The picture up there shows you more color bars. As glass artists, we don't make these. We just go to the store and buy them. There's chemists, glass chemists, that make the color by mixing different metal oxides into clear glass. And it's a chemical reaction. It makes these different colors. So we buy the bars, and then you preheat the bar, however much of it you need. You break it and use that little chunk. You preheat it in the oven to be about 1,000 degrees. That way you can put it into the fire and melt it the rest of the way. Glass blowing is a layering process. So this shows you the colored glass. You do what's called an overlay, where you heat up the color and then you smush it around the bubble. And if you were to cut it, if you were to cut the glass into slices, you would see the layer of color is just a little bit with clear all around it. They're getting all these colors built up and ready so that they can do another one of those Swedish overlays. So all the glass at this middle bench, that's all clear glass. Fresh out of the furnace, it looks like that because it's 2,200 degrees in the furnace, melting all the clear glass. All of the glass, no matter what color it is going to look orange when we're working at these temperatures. So when it cools down, we're making these stuff cups with opaque white and a transparent blue on top of it. So it'll look like a really bright, vibrant blue because the transparent on top of the white makes it a lot brighter. So they're setting that up so that they can make another Swedish overlay. But you pick up the color rods on the end of a stick, similar to this one we've got here, and then you put that in the fire and melt it to where it's molten like the clear glass. And once it's molten enough, then you can add it to the clear. And since the colors are made of different metals, they don't mix like paints. So the clear glass doesn't mix into the color, it just makes that layer on top of the clear. If you were to try to mix two different colors, it would just look like it's like marble mixed together. It doesn't like combine to mix. So if you put red glass and white glass together, it's not going to make pink, it's just going to make red and white all swirled together. So they're putting blue on top of white to make it look like a really bright blue. But they've got to make the clear bubble that they're going to put the color on top of. So we've got the clear glass here. They're making on that side of the studio. It's kind of hard to see because the garage is in the way. But they're making the color bubble over there. Since we just started this one, they're mostly just getting all the color bar up to the right temperature. And then they'll put it all together and make a bubble. We didn't like that clear bubble, so we're going to make another one. Clear glass, you can just put back in the furnace and melt down again. So they're going to put all that glass in a bucket. That bucket of glass later will get put back in the furnace and melt so that they can reuse it. We try to use as much of the glass as we can because it is expensive. So they don't want to waste it if they can reuse it. So that clear glass is going to get put back in the furnace later. It had too many bubbles in it. So Nick right now, he just sprayed water into the tank. The water pops the bubbles that are on the surface of that pool of molten glass inside. So the reason they got rid of the bubble they had is because it had too many little bubbles from when you scoop the glass out. Sometimes you can trap a bunch of little air bubbles. And they just don't want those little air bubbles. So they're going to start over and do another one with one bubble instead of a bunch of little ones. I hope that makes sense. And if any of you have any questions, my name is Shannon. You can just shout at me or raise your hand or something. Yeah. how do they get the glass on the pipes? So in the furnaces, there's just a big bowl that holds all the glass inside. If you take a honey dipper into a jar of honey and you turn it, it wraps around. It's the same concept with glass blowing. You put the stick into the pool of glass and you turn it, and the glass wraps around the end, and you scoop out as much as you can. So the glass is really molten. You don't scoop out a big blob at once. So they scoop out as much as they can, and then they'll let that glass cool down and scoop more on top of it. The consistency of glass is a lot like honey. As it's hotter, it's more liquid, and when it gets colder, it gets stiffer and more gooey. So they wait for it to get stiffer and gooey before they put it back in the furnace to get more on top of it. So it's all about controlling the temperature and the timing that you do these different things. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Cool. Yeah. So really what the team right now is doing is balancing the temperature, trying to get all of that color up to the right temperature while also trying to make sure they have enough clear glass. So they have to line up the temperature and timing to get more glass, and they have to make sure the colored glass is hot enough so that they can add it to the clear glass. So we're getting everything set up and ready to do the technique that they want to do, which is called a Swedish overlay. If anyone joined us recently, you might have missed me explaining what this is. But a Swedish overlay is a type of color application that was invented by Swedish glass artists. Glass blowing is a layering process, so you can put the color on a bubble and then encase it in more clear. But for these pieces we're making, this is for a private commission, they need the color to be on the outside layer so that they can carve into it and create designs. So they're doing a Swedish overlay, so the color is on the outside. They've got to take the color on that separate rod on that side of the studio and encase it in clear and blow a bubble. So the raw color glass is on the inside of the bubble over there. They're going to take that bubble and attach it to this one and then flip the bubble inside out so that the color is on the outside. And that's called a Swedish overlay. And it takes a while to set it all up. A lot of different moving parts. So they're setting up the color bubble on the left. They're setting up the clear bubble at the middle. And when they're all ready, they'll meet at the center bench and they'll put the two bubbles together and then flip the color bubble inside out. It's a pretty abstract process. I hope that made sense. It will if it didn't soon. But Gabe is shaping the clear glass right now with the wet pad of newspaper. You can see the steam coming off of it. There's a lot of chemistry involved in making the colored glass and making the glass itself. And there's a lot of physics involved in blowing glass and shaping it and working with it. So the paper is soaked in water. Since the glass is so hot, the second that paper touches it, the water evaporates and makes the steam. And that steam is a thin bed in between the tool and the glass, and that's why it's not getting hot in his hand or catching on fire. As long as the paper's wet, it works. When it starts to get dry, instead of it being steam, it's actually smoke from the paper burning. So you have to make sure the paper is wet so it works. But the paper is a really nice way to shape the glass. It's the closest way you can get to touching the glass with your hands, which you don't want to do at these temperatures. So the paper is a nice tool that's very, very close to the glass that you can really get nice shapes and curves into it. Somebody left their stuff over there. Yeah, the camera on the screen is showing you the bench over there because this, the garage, the big silver box kind of blocks your view, but you can see a little better what's going on from the camera. They have it set up in a specific way, but it is kind of in your way. So that's why the cameras will show you different angles, gonna get you a better view of what's going on.
Yeah.
You have a question? So how do they shape the glass? That's your question? It all depends on the temperature. When the glass is really hot, it's molten and malleable. Have you ever played with Play-Doh or taffy or something like that? Yeah, the consistency of glass when it's hot is a lot like that. It's really, you can move it around. So they get it really hot and they can shape it, and as it gets colder, it gets stiffer. So once it's too stiff to shape it, they have to put it back in the fire and get it hot again so that they can shape it again. It's a lot like the consistency of honey. You know, when honey is really warm, it's really liquid and flowing, and as it gets colder, it gets kind of gooey. It's pretty similar to that. They just have to manage the temperature so that it's hot enough that they can shape the glass. And the pipe, that stick that we have it on, is like a giant straw. You can blow through it and inflate the glass. So there's a mouthpiece on that end, and then it's hollow all the way to the other end. So they literally blow into the glass and inflate it like a balloon. But it has to be hot enough. Right now, that's pretty cold. And cold is a relative term in glass blowing. Anything below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit is cold because the glass isn't hot enough to do anything to at that temperature. And if it gets too cold, it'll break. So they have to manage that temperature to make sure it doesn't get too cold. But if it gets too hot, then it's just so molten that they can't control it. So anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit is where they're working. Pretty high temperatures. And it can seem like there's a lot of waiting around, but that's because they have to let the glass cool down. If they try to cool it down aggressively, then it would break. So they really just have to wait for it to cool. And then they also have to wait for it to heat up. You can't really force the glass to get hot or cold faster. That's what breaks the glass. So right now, Stina is just monitoring this glass and letting it cool down. And then once it's cold enough, we'll put it into the garage, which is around 1,000 degrees. And the garage is where you park pieces when you're not using them. It just kind of holds them at that 1,000 degrees. That way, when we're ready to do the next part, it's at the right temperature. The next part involves lining up the temperature of the two separate rods that have glass on them. So this one is going to be ready before the other one. So we're waiting for the colored glass bubble to be ready to add it to the clear one. So we have to keep the clear one at the right temperature until the other one's ready. And that's why we put it in the garage. Once they're both ready, then we can take it back out and put them together. So now the clear bubble is in the garage. Gabe has the colored bubble. He encased it in clear. The clear that's on the outside of the bubble is going to end up being the part that gets attached to the clear bubble in the garage. So we're going to flip this bubble inside out. It's kind of an abstract concept. It might not make sense. But we have a diagram that explains a Swedish overlay. If we could get that on the screen, maybe we can get a better visual trying to explain what I'm trying to talk about. There we go. So we'll attach the colored bubble to the clear bubble, and then it gets flipped inside out. So we'll use tools to take that layer of glass and just flop it over. So those little lines he just pulled and stretched out over here just give you a better idea of what the color is supposed to look like. It's going to be this kind of grayish blue on top of white. Those are still hot, so I'm not going to grab them to bring them over, but when they cool down, I can bring them closer. Gabe is carving in what's called the jack line. It's a restriction line that can get the bubble off of the pipe that it's on right now. At the right temperature, when you put water on the glass, you can create cracks. So they'll put cracks on that line, which will weaken it, and they can break it off the pipe. But they've got to attach it to the other one first. So this is just in preparation for the Swedish overlay that they're about to do. So Stina is over here at the garage getting that clear bubble ready to take out so that they can put this bubble onto that one. They're kind of just waiting right now for all the temperatures to be the right spot. But once it's ready, they'll do their Swedish overlay, which is a pretty cool part of the process. But the color that they want to be on the outside is the inside of this white bubble right now. That white is going to get put directly onto the clear glass, and then they'll flip the rest of the bubble inside out so that the color that's on the inside will actually be on the outside. Oh yeah, there's the visual up on the screen to give you a better idea of what I'm trying to explain. So we're just waiting for our temperatures to line up. So we're heating up the top part of that colored bubble, and they're going to meet at the bench and smush the colored bubble onto this clear one. So they're just waiting for it to get hot enough, lining up that temperature. We'll bring it to the bench, and now they're going to attach it. Hot glass sticks to other hot glass, so as long as it's hot enough, it'll stick to it. Now that that bubble is attached, we can break it off of the pipe that it's on the outside of the bench. We'll put water on that restriction line, which will crack the glass. They'll hit the pipe, and it will break on the weak spot. So that's what they're about to do. They'll take a tool, hit the pipe, those vibrations go into that spot and break it. So now both of the bubbles are on one pipe. They just need to flip that colored bubble all the way around the clear one so that the color on the inside of the color bubble is on the outside of the whole piece. So we have the jacks, which are a metal bladed tool, but we also have a tool called parchofis that are the same design, but they're made from wet wooden sticks instead of metal blades. And those wet wooden sticks are what is going to help us flip the bubble inside out. So they'll get it hot enough, they'll put the wet wooden sticks into the bubble, and they'll push towards the pipe, and it will flip the glass over to put it all the way down onto the pipe. That's called a Swedish overlay. They're overlaying the color in a method that was invented by a Swedish glass artist so that the colored glass is on the outside of the bubble. That way they can, once the glass cools down, they can carve into it and show the layers underneath to make a design or a pattern. So we're making, essentially the end product of what we're doing is going to be a cup, or kind of like a cup. It'll be called a stuffed cup. So it's a cup that does not flat on the bottom. It's just going to be round. A stuffed cup is a prep work setup. They're going to take the cup once it's cooled down and carve into it, and then they'll reheat the colored glass when they're ready to use it. It's called a stuffed cup because it is a cup that you stuff more glass into. So they'll take what they're making now, and on another day, they'll heat it back up, get glass on the end of a pipe, and then fill the cup with more glass so they can blow it out, and that will keep the color on the outside. Normally, you'd put the color on there, and then you would get more clear glass to encase it. But if it's encased in clear glass, it's harder to carve away at the color. So they put it on the outside. That way they can easily carve that color away and make a design. But right now, they're working on flipping that clear, or flipping the colored bubble inside out to lay on top of the clear. And they can't do it all in one heat, so they have to do it little by little. They heat it up, and they'll sit down at the bench, and they'll open it a little bit till it gets too cold, then they'll heat it up and do it again. It's a lot of back and forth between heating the glass up and working with it while it's hot. As it gets colder, it gets stiffer, so they have to heat it up back and forth between heating it up and working with it while it's hot until it gets too cold, then they go heat it up back and forth. So that Swedish overlay didn't go how they wanted. They tossed that one. They're going to make a pitcher while they wait for the color to heat up for the next one. The color has to preheat before you take it and put it in the fire, so they need it to keep preheating. While it's finishing preheating, they're going to make something else. They're going to make a pineapple mold pitcher, is what it's called. But the mold is called a pineapple mold because the glass looks like a pineapple when you stuff it into this mold. It's an optic mold that stamps a pattern onto the glass. So they're going to use that mold to stamp a pattern, which will put indents in the glass. And then when you gather more glass over those indents, it traps little bubbles. So it'll make a nice pattern of bubbles on the piece. And they're going to make a pitcher. So they'll add a spout and a handle. But they're waiting for the color to heat up for our next Swedish overlay. While we're waiting, they're going to make one of these pitchers. But if you can see these are the colors that are going to be on our Swedish overlays. It's white with this like kind of grayish blue on top. These are the same colors they're using. These ones just got stretched out into what's called cane. They're like thin little sticks. So you can use these to make stripe patterns on the glass. You can chop these up and line them up like pencils and then roll a bubble on top of it and it makes stripes. But this is just a color sample so you can see what the colors look like. I'll leave them on this table if you want to come get a closer look. You can come check it out. They're just sharp on the edges, so don't pick them up. So right now we're building up the layers of the glass. Since it's so hot in the furnace, you can only get so much at a time. So you scoop out a little bit, and then you let it cool down, which makes it stiffer. Then you can take the colder, stiffer glass and put it in the furnace and get more on top of it. So they build it up in layers. Each scoop of glass out of the furnace is called a gather. So one gather at a time, they're going to build up the thickness of the glass so that they can make something the size they want. When you blow the glass, it stretches and gets thinner. So if you want to make something big, you have to have really thick, a lot amount of glass to blow it up into that size. So they're going to build up their layers, and then once they have enough, they'll start to blow the bubble, and they'll add the optic pattern, and then they'll make the shape and add the handle to make our pitcher. And you'd expect, because the glass is hot and molten, that this is kind of a fast-paced type of work, but sometimes it can actually be pretty slow. There's a lot of waiting for the glass to cool that involves managing the temperature. You can use a compressed air gun to blow on the glass to cool it faster, but if you do that too much, you risk cracking the glass. So a lot of the times, if they're just sitting at the bench and they look like they're not doing anything, they're just waiting for the glass to cool down. So that's what we're doing, is waiting for this to cool. We're also going to add some color to it. This is called a color overlay. So the color bar on this rod that Stina has is getting cut off and added to our clear bubble. It's going to get laid over the bubble. So it's a color overlay. You lay the color over the clear bubble. And then we can encase that in clear glass to blow it out. And that layer of color will stretch and make the whole thing have a solid color on it. Not sure what color it is. All the colors look orange when they're hot, so I'm not sure what the color actually is. Sorry, what was your question? So now we did our color overlay. There's a bubble inside that. We're going to encase that in more clear. And then we can start to blow it up a little bit bigger. Trent is just kind of waiting for it to cool down so he can put it back in the furnace to get more clear glass. If that's too hot, when we try to gather more glass on it, you could collapse or distort the bubble. So temperature and timing is really the heart of everything in glass blowing. Managing the temperature so that you can manage the way the glass moves and doing things at the right time so that they're the right temperature for what you want to do. So he's going to put that back in the furnace and gather out more. Since that glass is cold, it's not going to fall into the furnace. All the glass in the furnace is clear, so you don't want to get the color in there. It'll mix with all the clear, and then everything you have will have a slight color tint to it that you don't want. So you're going to make sure that when you put colored glass in there that it's colder and stiffer so it doesn't fall into the big bowl of clear glass. So Trent encased that in some fresh clear glass. He's over here, so you might not be able to see him. But he's just making sure all that clear glass is spread out evenly over the color. And then we can start to blow the bubble. And I will let everybody know, if you ever want to see what's going on in the shop, but you can't make it physically here, we do have a live stream. If you go to the museumofglass.org, there's under the Hot Shop tab, it'll take you to the live stream. Or you can search Museum of Glass on YouTube and watch the live stream there as well. So if you ever want to see what's going on here, you can tune into the live stream and watch. Our cameras that we have all around here will show you what's happening in the shop. Anytime that we're open blowing glass, the live stream is going. So Trent just stuffed the bubble into the mold that stamped the optic pattern on there. It created a bunch of divots in the glass. So when we gather more glass on top of that, those divots will trap bubbles, and then we'll have a pattern of bubbles on our piece. So now Gabe is gathering more clear glass on top of our glass that we put in the optic mold. When it comes out, you'll be able to see all those little bubbles. Trap all those little bubbles in there. Now we can blow that out and shape it into a pitcher. Then we'll put a handle and a spout on it. We'll have a nice little optic mold pitcher. This tool that Gabe was just using is a wet wooden spoon called a block. It helps you get all the glass in a symmetrical shape, get all the clear glass you just gathered in an even thickness around the whole thing. That way when we blow the glass, it doesn't blow out one side more than the other. The thinner the glass gets, the faster it'll cool down. So if we have a thick and thin spot, it'll blow out a little bit misshaped. So the blocks are the wet wooden spoons that just help us get it back in a symmetrical shape. They live in buckets of water right behind the bench, and the water soaks into the wood, which helps preserve the tool and keep it from burning onto the glass. The water creates steam because the glass is so hot. As soon as the wet wood touches it, the water evaporates, and there's a thin bed of steam in between the paper, or in between the glass and the tool. That torch is called a fluffy torch because the flame is fluffy. The glass closer to the pipe is going to get colder faster because the metal is taking all the heat out of it. So that torch just helps get more heat back into the part that's closest to the pipe. But now they're going to start blowing that bubble out. You'll see the glass stretch and look like it's getting bigger. We're going to start shaping this into a pitcher. So Gabe is telling Alex when to blow into the pipe. It's like a big hollow straw. So blowing into the mouthpiece is going to inflate the glass on the other side. Some of our tools are also made of metal, so we preheat that metal so that it doesn't take too much heat from the glass. We're going to use that tool that Stina just put into the flame to help carve in what's called the jack line. The tool is called the jacks. So we're carving the jack line, which is helping us create a restriction line that will get the piece off the pipe later in the process. Stina is also using a drywood paddle to shield Gabe's arm from the radiating heat coming off the glass. His hand and his arm are very close to glass that is over 1,000 degrees, and that gets really spicy. So if you put a paddle in between your skin and the glass, it just kind of staves off some of that heat so it doesn't get really hot. Gravity is one of our tools. So hanging the pipe is going to stretch the glass, making this a longer bubble, making it taller. And now we're using folded up newspaper soaked in water to shape the glass. Same concept as the blocks. The water creates steam, and that's how we can use that tool to shape the glass. It's the closest you can get to touching the glass with your hands, which you don't want to do while it's at this temperature. But that line that he carved in, that will be the top of the pitcher. The bottom of it is the part farthest away from the pipe. And a glass bubble, like any other bubble, blows out round, so we have to flatten the bottom of it once he's ready. He'll heat up just that part of the glass, get it hot enough that we can push on it to create a flat spot, and then we'll have the bottom of our pitcher. These reheating chambers are really insulated. So the only part of the glass that gets hot is what goes inside the opening, which at the angle you're sitting, you can't really see how far in it is, but he's only got a couple inches of it inside the door. So only the very bottom of it is getting hot. And you'll be able to tell when he brings it back out which part is hotter, because the hotter it is, the more it glows orange. So the bottom of it will be really glowing and moving orange. The top part closer to the pipe will look more like the blue color that it's supposed to end up being. If it gets too cold, though, it breaks. So you won't really see the true color of the glass today. Once we're done with the piece, it has to cool down slowly inside this big black box called the annealing oven. If glass gets too cold too quickly, it'll break from thermal shock. So it has to cool slowly overnight in a controlled atmosphere. So tomorrow morning we can take it out, and it'll be the colors it's supposed to be, but it'll also be cold enough to touch. At the coldest point while we're working on it, it's going to be 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. If it gets too much colder than 1,000 degrees, that's when it starts to crack or break. You can see here really heated up the bottom. We're flattening it with the dry wood paddle and also trapping all the air inside the pipe. That gives them air pressure to push against. If we didn't trap the air in the pipe, when you push on it, air would shoot out the other end of the pipe and dome the bottom up like the bottom of a wine bottle. And they don't want it to look like that for this piece. So they trap the air in the pipe so that they can push against that air pressure and make that nice and flat. So now that the bottom of the piece is done, they want to shape the top of it, but the top of the piece is what's attaching it to the blowpipe. So they have to take it off the blowpipe by doing what's called a punty transfer. The punty is just what we call the rod that we're going to transfer the piece onto. So over there, Alex has a solid rod with a little bit of glass on the end of it. He's shaping it up in a specific shape so that we can attach that to the bottom of our piece. Hot glass will stick to other hot glass. So we're going to attach that to the bottom of our piece. Once it's attached, then we can remove it from the blowpipe and work on the other side. So at the right temperature, the glass is cold enough that if you put water on it, it cracks. They're going to put water on that restriction line they carved in right off the head of the pipe. That'll make a weak spot so that when they tap the pipe with a metal tool, the vibrations go into that weak spot and it breaks right where they tell it to with the water right there. They'll break it off the pipe, and Alex will catch it attached to the punty. So now they flipped it around. That part, the temperature and timing, is really important. If you stick the punty onto the piece and it's too cold, it won't attach. And when you break it off the blowpipe, it smashes on the ground, and you start over. But since they did it right, now they can finish their piece. They had to get it cold enough to break it, and now they need it hot enough to fix that shape. So they're going to work on heating that up, and then we'll start to make the spout and then add a handle to our pitcher. So yeah, that's a good question. The way that they decide who's going to do what job here is one person is called the gaffer, and that's like the person in charge. And then everybody else is assisting the gaffer in making this piece. So Gabe, the one that has the glass right now, he's the gaffer. That's the lead glass blower. Everyone else is on the team, and he's kind of directing them on what he wants them to do. And they've made a lot of these, so they don't really have to have a lot of communication to do this one. But normally, if you're making something really big with a lot of people, there's a lot of talking, and the studio can get kind of loud because, I mean, the torch is pretty loud. There's a lot of noises, so there's a lot of yelling and shouting to everybody who needs to do what next. When you're making something really big, it's a really, really loud, really exciting production. But since we're making something that they've made a bunch of times before, there's not as much yelling or talking or communicating, but they still have to communicate because the temperature and timing of when they do these different steps is important. So before they started, they talked about it. It's kind of like a sport where you have your team captain, and before the play, you all meet together and you talk about the play, what you're going to do. So that's kind of what they did. They planned ahead before they started. Yeah. So we're asking about the Kids Design Glass program. That's the kids draw a picture, and then the team has a meeting and they decide which ones they want to make. So the picture that the kid draws is like the reference photo, and the kids that get picked to do that, they don't help make the piece. They sit here and they watch it being made. It's kind of dangerous for them to be down here if they're not familiar with it. So they get to watch their drawing get made into a 3D creation, which is pretty cool. And they make more than one, so the kid that made the drawing gets to take one of the sculptures home, and then the other sculpture, one of them gets shown here. Yeah. So the kids' contribution to that is the drawings that they do, and then the team picks which drawing to make pieces out of. What? So Gabe is using the jacks to open the lip of the piece out, and Stina's using the paddle to help him keep it symmetrical. When it breaks off the pipe, it doesn't break in a perfect line. It breaks randomly and jaggedly like any other glass. So they cleaned up the edge of it and opened it up. When glass is hot, you can cut through it with scissors. So they trimmed off the uneven broken parts with scissors. They just cut it off. And now they're working on cleaning up that shape. We've got to put a spout on it because it's going to be a little pitcher, like a lemonade or a tea pitcher. And then Alex over here is getting some glass that we can attach for a handle. But now that this is a little bit colder, you can see that blue, transparent blue color. You can see those bubbles, that bubble pattern on the inside. We're going to add a clear handle and then carve in a little spout, and then we'll have our pitcher. So right now, Gabe is just giving the piece what's called a flash. It's a maintenance heat because the glass has to stay in between a specific window of temperature. If it gets too cold, it will break. So it has to be at least 1,000 degrees, but generally we don't need it to be more than around 2,000. So anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 is safe temperatures for the glass. A flash is just to make sure it doesn't get too cold and break. So we're getting ready to add that handle. We just have really fresh hot glass on the end of this pipe. It has a bubble in it, so it's going to be a hollow handle, so it's not too heavy. We blew a bubble. Glass is stretchy when it's hot, so they're pulling and stretching the glass around that bubble. And now they're going to shape it into a handle. You just grab it with a tool and bend it, stick it on there. Hot glass sticks to hot glass, so that's going to stick. And there's our handle. They made that look really easy, but sculpting a moving target is kind of hard. So they're going to use this hot torch that Stina has to just make sure that that handle really connected on the top. Because when you cut the glass with the tool, it cools it down. And if it's not hot enough, it doesn't really attach. So they're going to use that to make sure that it's hot enough that it actually fuses together. So that torch is called a hot torch because it is significantly hotter than the other torch. The fluffy torch, the big fluffy flame, is just oxygen. But this one is oxygen and propane, which makes it much hotter. So it heats the glass faster. And it spot heats specific parts. So we're spot heating the spot where we want to pull out the spout. So they're getting that extra hot. That way they can go in with a tool and just bend that little spot. Just using a copper rod to do that. Now it has a spout. And our piece is just about done. They just need to flash the glass into the fire a couple times to equalize the temperature of the whole thing. And Stina over there is going to get ready to load the piece into what's called the annealing oven. Glass will go through a molecular change as it cools down, so that has to be done in a controlled environment. Glass has to cool down slowly or it's shocked by the temperature change and breaks. So the annealer is going to cool this down slowly over time so that it doesn't break. The annealing oven sits at about 950 degrees, which is resting temperature for the glass. It's not so hot that it's going to melt and change shape, but it's hot enough that the glass won't crack from being too cold. That's the temperature of the inside of the annealing oven. We're going to put this in there at that temperature. So they're equalizing the temperature of this piece so that it's all about that temperature when we put it in the annealer. Stina has some Stina over here has some Kevlar wrapped tongs. Kevlar is a heat resistant material, so we can use those to grab the piece and load it into the annealing oven. If this piece were really big, she'd have to put on a full suit of protective clothing so that she could put the piece in the oven. It's 950 degrees in there, so they got to make sure you got protective gear to wear to load the piece in there. She'll have to physically put part of her body in there, so we want to make sure she doesn't get hurt. But the tongs can grab this size piece and load them in there. So we take it off the punty and melt the spot where the punty came off. At the right temperature, you can shock the punty connection and break it off. And now they're heating it up, stamping the Museum of Glass in there. Let's give this team a big hand for that nice little picture. That will end up in the Museum of Glass's gift shop. There's some in there right now if you want to go check them out. But now that that's done, they're going to start back up on the project they were working on. So for anyone that joined us while they were making the picture, what we're making today, besides the picture, is a private commission pieces And this is the first day of many days that they'll be in the hot shop working on these. So we were making that picture while we were waiting for some of the color to heat up. Because when we get the color, we buy it in cold glass bars like this. You have to preheat it so that it's hot enough that you can put it in the fire. If it's too cold when you put it in the fire, it explodes from thermal shock. So it has to be hot enough that that doesn't happen. And they were just waiting for that color to be hot enough. So they made the picture while they were waiting. But now the color is up to temperature. They can move back onto what they were doing before. We're doing what are called Swedish overlays. Glass blowing is a layering process. So you can put the colored glass and then encapsulate it in clear. But they want the colored glass to be on the outside of all the clear glass. So a Swedish overlay is going to help us put the color on the outside. They've got all their clear glass over here. They're going to shape that into a specific shape. The team on this side of the studio, they're going to get some colored glass and blow it into a bubble. And once this bubble and the colored bubble are both ready, they'll stick them together. And then the clear bubble will get smashed on, or the colored bubble will get smashed onto the clear one and then flipped inside out so that the color is on the outside. So it's kind of an abstract process. A Swedish overlay was invented by a Swedish artist, Swedish glass artist, who wanted to be able to carve directly into the colored glass. So they figured out a way where they could put the colored bubble on the outside of a bunch of clear glass. So that's what they're working on here. You'll see it in just a few minutes. They've got to set up the colored bubble. We don't have that ready yet. Glass blowing is all about controlling the temperature and the timing. So there's 2 benches that we're working on to do this one piece. The 2 bubbles will be on separate rods. And once they're both ready, they'll attach the 2 bubbles together to be on one rod and then shape it so that the color is on the outside. But the setup takes a little bit of time. So they've got the clear bubble and the clear glass that they're getting into the right shape. On that side of the studio, we're getting the color ready to make the bubble with the color in it. For a minute. And these pipes are like big straws. So the mouthpiece is on that side and the glass is on the other side. Gabe at the bench is shaping the glass and asking Stina to blow into the pipe when he needs more air inside the glass to inflate that bubble. But now we have it in a nice shape. We got the right amount of glass. Stina is just basically babysitting this, waiting for it to cool down and stiffen up. And the garage, that big silver box there, is where we park pieces of glass while we're waiting to get it all lined up with the temperature and timing. The garage is about 1,000 degrees inside, and that's a good temperature for the glass where it stays hot enough that it doesn't break, but it's cold enough that it's just going to stay in that shape. So Stina is waiting for this glass to cool down to about 1,000 degrees. That way she can put it in the garage, and that will hold that while we get the colored glass, or the colored bubble ready. So with really intricate pieces that have a lot of moving parts, you can park a lot of the pieces in the garage and make the other parts. And then it all comes together eventually when all the pieces are the right shape, the right temperature. So we're getting all that set up. If any of you have questions, just let me know. So Gabe has the blue glass on the end of this pipe. We've got a stick of white glass that we're heating up over there. We're going to put the white glass on top of the blue glass and then blow a bubble into it. That will make the blue glass the inside of the bubble. When we attach the color bubble to the clear bubble, we'll flip it inside out so that the blue is on the outside. It's an abstract process and approach. So it'll make sense soon if it doesn't right now. But this metal table, steel top table, is called a marver, M-A-R-V-E-R. You can shape and cool the glass by rolling it on the marver. Because of the temperatures of the glass, you can't really use your hands to do that part. And some of the tools make it harder to get it into this nice symmetrical shape. So the marver is a nice tool to use to get it exactly the shape we want. It also cools the outer skin of the glass. That way, when you blow the bubble, that outer skin kind of holds that shape so the bubble knows how to blow out or what shape to be. But that blue is like a transparent blue. So we're putting white on top of it, and the white will brighten up that blue a lot. So this is a good way to show you. This is how you get the color on there. This is a regular color overlay instead of a Swedish color overlay. You just drop the color on top of the bubble and then you smush it down the sides and it creates a layer. It's like pulling on a sock. You put that layer on top of the one underneath. So now we've got the white on top of the blue. Gabe has just got to roll it on the marver to push it the rest of the way up onto the pipe. And then we'll encase that in clear and blow out the bubble. Now that Gabe is finished doing the color overlay, that white is all the way over the blue underneath. There's a bubble inside. You just can't see it anymore because we covered it in opaque color. You can get transparent and opaque colors, but the opaques hide the bubble. So there is a bubble in there. We're going to encase that in more clear glass, and then we'll blow that bubble up bigger. The clear bubble that we're going to attach it to is in the garage, staying at about 1,000 degrees. That big silver box, the garage. So a lot of the times in glass blowing, it might look like they're just sitting at the bench not doing anything, but he's really waiting for the glass to cool down. As it gets colder, it gets stiffer. So he needs it cold and stiff. That way he can put it in the furnace and scoop out clear glass without losing any of the color. If it's too hot, it could fall into the pot full of clear glass, and then that would mix color into the clear, which we don't want to do. So he's getting more clear glass out of there, the same way you'd get honey out of a jar with a stick. You put it in there and you turn the pipe, the glass wraps around. And clear glass in the furnace is about 2,200 degrees Fahrenheit. So it doesn't look very clear, but that's just because of the temperature. As it cools, that clear glass will look less orange and look more clear. But they work with it at these high temperatures because the hotter it is, the more molten and malleable it is. So the colors always look a little bit weird when we're working with them just because of how hot we have to work. This wet wooden spoon is called a block, and that just gets it all in a symmetrical and even amount of glass around the bubble. It's soaked in water, and that creates steam. It just makes the tool last longer and makes it to where you can shape the glass without the wood burning and sticking to the glass, because that would leave little like scuzz marks on it if it was dry wood. But now we have all of the glass, they're going to start blowing and shaping this color bubble. Once the color bubble is ready, they'll heat up the clear one that's in the garage, and then they'll stick them together and fold the clear bubble, or fold the color bubble over the clear bubble so that all the color is on the outside. It's called a Swedish overlay. A glass blowing is something that's done in layers. It's a layering process. It's so hot in the furnace, you can only get so much at a time. So you scoop it out layer after layer until you have all the glass you need for the size thing you want to make. And the color doesn't melt in the furnaces. So we buy the color in bars. I've got a green one over here I can show you what they look like. But we buy bars of colored glass. And if you took cold glass like this and put it in the fire, it would explode from thermal shock. And I'm not exaggerating, it would literally go and explode into a bunch of little pieces. So you have to preheat the bar in the garage and then put it on the end of a stick and heat it up in the fire the rest of the way. So it preheats to about 1,000 degrees, and then you melt it all the way. And then when it's hot enough and molten, you can drip it over the clear bubble, and that makes a layer of color. But then you would encase all of that in more clear. A Swedish overlay is a process that can have the raw color on the outside of the bubble. And if the color is the outermost layer, you can carve into it or sandblast it, and that will create patterns and designs that show the layers underneath. So they're doing a Swedish overlay so that they can carve into this glass once it cools down, and it'll have a pattern or an image on it. If you do an overlay and encase it in clear, it's really hard to carve that color away because there's layers of clear glass on top of it. You'd have to carve into it really deep. So the Swedish overlay just makes it easier to carve directly into the color. So the process they're doing, this is the first step. They have to make the piece so that they can sandblast or carve into it later. But we're about to do our Swedish overlay. So they got to get the clear glass ready so that they can put this bubble on the clear and then flip it inside out so that the raw color that's on the inside of this bubble right now gets flipped inside out, and then the color's on the outside. I hope that made sense. That restriction line that Gabe carved right at the head of the pipe is called the jack line. That's like a score mark so we can get the bubble off the pipe. If it doesn't have a way to come off the pipe, when you try to get it off there, it'll just break wherever it's weakest. So if we carve in that line, that gives us a weak spot that we can break the glass off of in a controlled way. So we have to get it off the pipe somehow. So we carve in that line. We break it by using thermal shock to our advantage. If the glass gets too cold and you put water on it, it'll crack. So they put water on that specific spot. It makes a weak spot. That way they can break it off the pipe and it breaks exactly where they tell it to, instead of on whatever spot the glass wants to break. But they're almost ready to put the two bubbles together. They've got to line up the temperature and time so that it works. Hot glass will stick to other hot glass, so they've got to make sure the color bubble and the clear bubble are both hot enough that they'll actually stick together. So Alex is just getting the bottom half of the bubble hot. The part closer to that line we carved in is not heating up, so that we can break it off the pipe soon. We're getting the clear bubble hot enough that we can attach the top part of this bubble. Once they're both ready, they'll meet at this center bench and they'll stick them together. The end product for what we're making today is called a stuff cup. So they're going to make a cup-shaped piece of glass, and then they can heat that back up later and stuff more glass into it so that the color's on the outside. So they're attaching these two bubbles now. Once it's stuck on there as much as they want it on there, Gabe is going to put water on the neckline or the jack line of the colored bubble. Will hit the pipe and the vibrations will go into that weak spot and it'll come off the pipe. Just like that. Now there's an opening where they just broke it, so they can go inside of that bubble. They're going to take that bubble and flip it all the way inside out. So to flip this bubble inside out, we've got a tool called the Parchofis. They're basically like the jacks, but instead of being made of steel sticks, they're wet wooden sticks. So they'll make it easier to push that bubble to kind of flip it inside out and flatten it onto the clear bubble. It just has to be hot enough to do that. So this heat, he's going to spend a while getting the glass hot enough so that it's molten enough that he can flip it around. And Stina is using this drywood paddle to help keep that lip of the piece that we're flipping around stable. She can also use it to shield Gabe's arm. You can see how close his skin is to this glass that's over 1,000 degrees. So that paddle is shielding him from the radiating heat coming off the glass. Just makes it a little more comfortable for him to do the work that he's trying to do. But this is kind of a slow process. He's not going to heat it up and flip it all the way inside out in one move. He's going to do it a little bit at a time. So gradually we'll push that bubble to where it flips around until we lay it all the way flat over the clear bubble. And the color on the inside of the color bubble is blue. The color on the outside is white. So we're flipping it inside out so that the blue is on the outside and the white is underneath. Up on the screen, it shows you more of a visual of what we're trying to do, in case what I'm saying is confusing. So slowly pushing that to flip it over a little bit at a time. So he's almost got it flipped around all the way. It kind of looks like a little hat right now. He's got to flip the rest of the hat flat. All right, so he got all the color flipped all the way around. Now he's using what's called the Marver. It's a steel top table. You can roll the glass on the Marver. It cools and shapes the glass. So he's cooling and shaping all of that to make it a nice symmetrical shape again. So that torch is called a fluffy torch. The glass on the pipe and closest to the pipe is going to get colder because of the metal taking the heat from it. So that torch helps heat up the glass that's closer to the pipe so that you can work with it more. So they're going to work on carving in another one of those restriction lines like they did on that bubble before they attached it. They want to take this off this pipe later, so they got to carve in that restriction line to get it off. We're working towards making what's called a stuff cup. So the bubble in here, we're going to blow this to shape it kind of like a cup. And once it's the right shape, we'll cool it down inside this box over here called the annealing oven. Later on, another day, after the glass is cooled down in there, they can clean it up a little bit, take it into what's called the cold shop. This is the hot shop because the glass is hot in here. The cold shop, you can take cold glass and cut and polish and grind and carve into it. So they'll work on that in the cold shop, and then they'll bring it back in here. And instead of cooling the glass in the annealer, they'll start the annealer and turn it up so that it goes from cold to hot enough that we can take it back out. And it's called a stuff cup because they'll put it on the ground, and they'll take a pipe with more glass and stuff it into the cup, which will fill the inside of it, leaving the raw color on the outside, but giving them more glass to make a bigger thing. So this is just the first day in the hot shop towards a pretty intricate private commission that they're doing. So we've made a couple of these stuffed cup Swedish overlay pieces today. I think this is the last one. And then they'll work on more components for the private commission once they finish making these cups. So they're just working on blowing the bubble, and then they'll carve in that restriction line to get it off the pipe. Then they need to flip the piece around and open the lip of it. So there's a lot of transferring the piece onto different pipes back and forth to get the shape that we want. Because you can only work on the part farthest away from the pipe. You can't really change the shape of the part that's holding it onto the pipe. So you have to break it off there to work on the other side. We're carving in that restriction line now. That will be the top of our cup. The bottom of it is the part farthest away from the pipe. Now we are getting ready to take the piece off the blowpipe, doing what's called a punty transfer. So the punty is what we call this rod over here that Alex has. He's shaping it up with a little bit of glass on it. We'll use that little bit of glass to attach the rod to the piece. Once it's attached, we'll break it off the blowpipe, which will flip it around 180 degrees. That way we can work on the other side. Hot glass sticks to other hot glass. So at the right temperature, these can get stuck together. And then just like they got the bubble off the other pipe, you're going to do the same thing with this one. At the right temperature, you can put water on that restriction line, and it will shock the glass, creating little cracks, essentially making a weak spot. You hit the pipe with a metal tool, and it sends those vibrations through the pipe and into the weak spot, and it breaks it, separates it from the pipe. So they're just letting that punty set up a little bit. They want it to be a little bit colder. So water right there is going to crack the glass, hit the pipe with the metal tool, and it comes off. So now they flip the piece around, they can work on the top while it's attached to the bottom instead of the other way around. They're going to take the opening of this piece and just open it to where the walls are all straight, so it has a bigger opening. Right now the opening is like pretty small. So they're going to heat it up and open that up. And that's the last step for making our stuffed cup. So this cup is going to go into the annealing oven over there and cool down overnight. Once it's cold, they'll take it in the cold shop where they can grind and polish the glass. And then, on another day in the shop, they'll put that back into the annealing oven, and instead of cooling it down, they'll do it in reverse. They'll heat it up slowly. That way they can take it out of the annealer and put more glass inside of it, and that will keep the raw color on the outside. They want to keep the colored glass on the very outside of it. So that's why we had to do the Swedish overlay. Glass blowing's a layering process, and most of the time when you use color, you put the color over a clear bubble, and then you encase it in more clear. But they want the color to be on the outside, so we can't encase this in more clear. So that blue glass is the outermost layer, and then there's white right underneath it. They can carve into it or sandblast it to remove some of the blue to show the white underneath. And that's why they need that to be on the outside layer. Because if there was clear on it, they would have to carve into it really deep, and it would have really big grooves in it, which would translate as thick and thin spots in the glass. And that makes it really hard to blow glass if it has thicker and thinner spots, because the thinner it is, the faster it cools, and the thicker it is, the longer it stays hot. So if it has different temperatures in the piece, when you blow the bubble, it blows out in the thicker spots more than the thin spots. It makes it pretty difficult to work with. So having the color on the outside makes it less of a difference in the thick and thinness, which makes it easier to control. But these pieces we're making are part of a private commission that the team is working on. So this is day one in the shop making this private commission. It's going to be a multiple day process. So you're just seeing the very beginning. So this piece is finished. They're taking it off the punty so they can put it in the annealing oven where it will cool down slowly overnight. Let's give the team a big hand for this beautiful Swedish overlay stuffed cup. Nice. The inside of the annealer is about 950 degrees, so it'll cool down slowly overnight in there systematically. Tomorrow morning we can take it out and it'll be cold enough to touch. But right now it's about 950 degrees. Yeah. And I think it is lunchtime now. So we're going to take our lunch break. And we'll be back in here around 2-ish is usually when we come back. But if anyone has any questions, you can come talk to me. I'll stick around for a little bit.
Yeah.